1/4 of the Earth's surface is covered by 40 million square kilometers of desert. More than 110 countries and about 1 billion people around the world have been affected by desertification.
The public thinks this is something far off, but a year or two ago during drought, they were paying more for their Cheerios and for their bread.
I think it's ridiculous. We have bigger problems right now, and to have the president be there for an extended period of time talking about global warming being the biggest problem facing this country is insane.
There's 13.9 billion hectares on this planet, of land on this planet. That's all there is. We've degraded and turned over 5 billion of that into desert and wasteland.
From our soil, and particularly the top 30 centimetres, comes just about everything that the planet needs to survive. From it comes our food, clean water, our fibre, building materials, and a lot of our energy. And indeed it was President Roosevelt who said that the nation that destroys its soil destroys itself.
It's important to regenerate soils because our planet needs it really badly. They've become very degraded. About 50 to 70% of the carbon in our soils has actually been lost, and that carbon has actually gone up into the atmosphere. People don't realise this, that our soils emit carbon as well as our fossil fuels emitting carbon. So what we can do is actually close the cycle and draw that carbon back from the atmosphere down into the soils.
It's not good enough just to stop reducing emissions. It's equivalent to sort of somebody that's sick and that we just stop the factor that's causing that sickness. We've also actually got to restore their health.
We look at any kind of trajectory to 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius. So to limiting global warming to 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees Celsius by 2100. Almost all the scenarios by the IPCC suggest that you have to have negative emissions in the end. What that means is negative emissions can of course come from different sources, but it's most likely going to come from some form of land sequestration, including the use of forestry.
So in a sense, as we saw in the Keeling curve, if we're emitting 10 billion tonnes of carbon every year, we've now got to not just stop that 10 billion tonnes and yes, get into the drawdown and the rebuilding of healthy biosystems.
After World War II, it became very big to have fertilisers and these industrial agriculture practices.
We've obviously been involved with the Green Revolution. You know, how do we grow more food above ground, you know, to feed the people, you know, to address hunger.
And these practices caused great success, and so it was thought that they were the answer, but what's happened is that they've been degrading our soils all these years. In the soil is actually billions of little microbes that are actually needed for the soil to be healthy and for the carbon to be sequestered. So when we have all of these chemicals going in, they kill all of the microbes. So it's really important that we transition away from these practices to be able to actually regenerate our soils.
Broadly speaking, I think in this country you've got about 10 to 15% of farmers who are real innovators. And our original 21 case studies were all farmers who were going downhill pretty quickly because their landscapes were degraded, they were overgrazing, or the streams weren't functioning correctly and so on. But of their own volition, they decided they were going to change. And this they did by looking at how to get their soil going, get their stream water flowing more slowly, putting trees on the ridges, fixing their riparian zones, rehydrating their wetlands, all those things. They're the innovators, and then they planted their crops and controlled their grazing systems and so on. There's probably another 40 or so who would change if they had the resources to do the things, or some of the things that I mentioned.
In a farming community, there's a huge peer group pressure, more than you'd realise. And so if a farmer decides he's going to do something different, he comes under enormous pressure just from his peers alone. And because he's talking in a different mind frame, like he can't talk to his friends anymore about what he's doing. because they don't understand it, and they get angry. And so instead of being able to go down the pub with his mates, in the end, he's got to find another peer group, and usually that'll be the ones from elsewhere that are doing what he's doing. And so then you get like a silo mentality, so that information really doesn't filter out into the community because they've isolated, and that's a typical status quo.
Countries have signed up to increase their soil carbon by 0.4% per hectare per annum. And this is actually enough to sequester all of our emissions. Of course, this isn't a silver bullet. We must stop all of our fossil fuel emissions. But while we're drawing down our emissions in the sort of 10 or 15 years that it's going to take us to get off fossil fuels, we can increase these soil carbon sinks and actually start reducing the amount of carbon that's going into the atmosphere.
I see this as being non-political. I see it as something that both Labor and Liberal and the minor parties, the federal sense and at the state sense, should be able to pick up and work together for the common good. And that would be a great thing for the public. The public could say, thank God, our political people are starting to do something of national benefit without fighting and squabbling over budgets or numbers.
I'd say vote. Vote climate realistically. If every single individual in Australia took actions to be energy efficient, to turn off their lights from not using them, to turn off their computers from not using them, etc., etc., it would have an absolutely minimal impact upon our emissions as a country. If every single person voted for the parties who are actually pushing for effective targets and pushing for effective climate action, then all of a sudden Australia could decarbonise by 2050.
The bottom line is that we can take carbon out of the atmosphere and we can put it in our soils via photosynthesis and root exudes, and it's better to put it in the soils than to have it in the atmosphere. So I guess my single message would be, take it as a solution, stop arguing about how much can be done, and just get on and let's do it.